Kilmallock, as its name suggests, began as an ecclesiastical foundation. The original form of the name was Kilmallock, that is, the Church of Mallock. Mallock was a saint of the early 7th century. We know little about him, apart from the fact that he is described as having been of noble and ancient stock of Khyber, second king of Ireland. The probable date of his death was 650, and his feast occurs on March the 26th. Mallock founded his church on the side of Kilmallock Hill, about half a mile from the present town. There is evidence in the annals of the Four Masters that Mallock founded not only a church but also a monastery. For some reason the monastery appears to have been transferred from Kilmallock Hill to the lower grounds on the banks of the Luba. For the round tower, which has been incorporated in the old church of St. Peter and Paul in the churchyard, is much older than the church, and most likely belonged to an early Gaelic monastic establishment. But, perhaps, there were a number of churches making up the ancient monastery of Kilmallock, one on the hill, one on the river bank, and others, of which no trace now remains, in other locations. The town of Kilmallock as such owes its origin to the Normans, who were quick to realise the strategic value of the old monastic site in the Lubat Valley, guarding as it did the important passes through the Ballyhowers and the Galties. Of all the Norman families who came to Ireland, none was more famous than the Fitzgerald, the family known to history as the Geraldines. The Geraldines divided into two great branches, one branch having as its head the Earl of Kildare, the other branch, the Munster branch, having at its head the Earl of Desmond. From early in the 13th century, Kilmallock became a very important Desmond Geraldine town. A minor branch of the family, the Fitzgibbons, had particularly close links with the immediate vicinity of Kilmallock. The head of the Fitzgibbons bore the title White Knights. By the end of the 13th century, Kilmallock was a walled town. The town's Dominican monastery, still beautiful even in decay, dates from 1291. The tower of the monastery is a 15th century addition, standing 90 feet high. It is slender and graceful, being more in the Franciscan tradition in that respect than in the Dominican tradition. Usually, Dominican towers are broad in proportion to their height. There are two lovely windows in the monastery, the famous east window being in the chancel, the other in the south transept. Other notable features are the 14th century sedilia, the Burgate monument and the White Knight monuments, which we shall see later. The monastery was suppressed in 1541 and the friars were expelled during the reign of Elizabeth I. But they came back and went again on a number of occasions in the first half of the 17th century, depending on the fortunes of the Irish cause and the ebb and flow of persecution. just across the Luba from the Dominican monastery, and within the town walls was the church of St. Peter and Paul, the remains of which are in a good state of preservation. The earliest part of the church dates from the 13th century, but there are considerable 15th century additions, which include a richly carved doorway. And as already been mentioned, the building incorporates a round tower, which is older than the church itself. The church was a collegiate church, that is, it had a chapter or college of canons as a cathedral would have. The church has some interesting sepulchral monuments, including one to John Verdun, the knight with the golden spur, who died in 1614, and to his wife Alsona, who died in 1625. The other monuments most worthy of notice are those to Thomas Fitzgerald and Joanne Burke, 1630, Morris, their son, and his wife Helena, 1635, Elizabeth, daughter of Daniel Webb, 1684. Fairs were licensed in Kilmallock as far back as 1221, and by 1280 it had 4 gates and a surrounding wall, a large part of which still survives, as well as the following streets: Main Street, John Street, Fleming Street, Water Street and Blawpot Street. Blawpot Street took its name from the gate which stood, and still stands there. The name Blawpot itself is a mixture of Irish and French, the blaw part being the Irish word blaw, flower, and the part being a corruption of the French word porte, meaning gate. So Blaw Porte is Flower Gate, the modern Blossom Gate. Kilmallock received its first charter about the beginning of the 14th century, and it was by this early charter that the Corporation of Kilmallock was created. A royal mint was established there sometime in the second half of the 15th century. A stretch of the old town wall still survives. In places reaching to a height of 20 feet, it stretches from the rear of a fine modern Catholic church down to Blossom's Gate. A large stone in a field at the rear of the Catholic church is thought to be the remains of a cromlech or megalithic tomb. This is more commonly known locally as the Giant's Rock. Standing at the junction of Sarsfield Street and Shear Street is John's Castle. It is in excellent state of preservation and called after England's King John. It's a 15th century tower house, probably on the site of an earlier fortress guarding the valley of the Luga. During the Parliamentary Wars 1645 to 1651, it was used as an arsenal by the Irish and later by the Cromwellians as a hospital. It is about 60 feet high and battlemented in Irish style. By now the Earls of Desmond ruled like native Irish kings over the greater part of Munster. They had become thoroughly Gaelicised. They followed Irish custom and tradition. They dressed like the Irish. They employed Irish poets and historians, spoke Irish as their native tongue, and scorned English rule as much as did any native Gaelic prince. When we remember that at that time Kilmallock was the capital of the vast Desmond territories, which were spread over Cork, Limerick, Kerry and Waterford, we get some idea of its importance. Certain duties or taxes were levied by the Earl of Desmond in Kilmallock, and he had certain specific rights and privileges in the town. When an English Lord Deputy was given a banquet in Kilmallock in 1541, it was said that the town had not seen an English official for at least 100 years. Desmond had for long looked upon itself as a kind of independent Irish kingdom, where the English king's writ did not run. But times were to change, largely due to the imperialistic aims of the English Tudor kings, and to the introduction of Protestantism to England. Attempts were being made to force a new religion on Ireland as well, and besides that, English colonists were beginning to take over parts of Munster by force of arms. Gerald, the 14th Earl of Desmond, bitterly resented the new policies, but endeavoured to tread cautiously through the dangers that surrounded him on all sides. But Queen Elizabeth was becoming more and more suspicious of Gerald. Eventually, in 1567, he was arrested in his own capital of Kilmallock. Arrested with him was his brother John of Desmond. It was hinted that both were guilty of treason shortly after he had been lodged in the Tower of London. Earl Gerald was forced to surrender his vast estates to the Crown to receive back whatever Her Majesty would allow. During the 6 years Gerald pined in the Tower, leadership of the Munster Geraldines was taken by that brave and romantic figure, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald. He was a first cousin of the imprisoned Gerald. When the English colonists who were to carry England into Ireland began to arrive in Munster and take possession of the Geraldine lands, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald called the Munster clans to action. He was now the accepted leader, and was in virtue of his outstanding abilities as he ruled Munster. He was one of the outstanding personalities of the 16th century. He excelled as a statesman as well as a soldier. He was an idealist, a man enthusiastic in temperament. He was also extremely practical, a scorner of luxury and haste, and had a marked preference for the bare ground to a bed after a hard day's fighting. Fitzmaurice's uprising enjoyed much success at the beginning. Strong allies flocked to his banner, and town after town in Munster surrendered to him. Kilmallock surrendered to him and paid his £100 ransom. But later the English under Sir Henry Sidney launched a powerful campaign against Fitzmaurice, a campaign that was to set the pattern of that incredible ruthlessness and barbarity that was to mark all the subsequent course of the war in Munster. Sidney took Kilmallock and put Hubert Gilbert in charge of the forces there, for the purpose of establishing peace, as he put it. Fitzmaurice's support began to weaken, and as the winter of 1570-71 approached, and the leaves fell from the trees of the great forest to the south of Kilmallock, Fitzmaurice, now deserted by so many of his allies, retreated to the inaccessible fastnesses of Aherlow, at the foot of the Galties. But he was not beaten, and from the annals of the Four Masters we learn that in 1571 James MacMorris took Kilmallock, not from a desire of its riches and various treasures, but because it had always been the rendezvous and sallyport of the English and Geraldines against him. Having attacked Kilmallock, they then set fire to the town and raised a dense, heavy cloud and a black, thick and gloomy shroud of smoke about it. After they had the town down and demolished its houses of stone and wood, so that Kilmallock became a receptacle and abode of wolves, in addition to all the other misfortunes up to that time. Fitzmaurice's raid on Kilmallock, then English held, took place on the morning of the 2nd of March, 1571. A large garrison was immediately placed in the half-destroyed town by Sir John Perrot, the English President of Munster, and every effort was made to capture Fitzmaurice. Eventually, when his case was hopeless, Fitzmaurice reluctantly agreed to submit. The following month, Earl Gerald and his brother John were released from prison, after 6 years spent in the Tower of London. In February 1575, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald went to the continent for aid to drive the English out of Ireland and restore the Catholic faith. Fitzmaurice and a mixed force of Spaniards and Italians landed at Smethwick Harbour in Kerry on the 17th of June 1579. The English took alarm. Drury, President of Munster, marched to Kilmallock, where he met the Earl Gerald, whom he kept prisoner for 3 days, until the Earl agreed to hand up his son James as a hostage for his good behaviour. During his stay in Kilmallock, 2 prisoners were brought before Drury. They were Bishop Patrick O'Haley of Mayo and Father Conor Rogue, a Franciscan priest. On the orders of Drury, both were cruelly tortured before being hanged on a mound called Crocta, outside the town walls, at the back of the present Catholic Church in Kilmallock. As for Fitzmaurice, he set out from Kerry for County Limerick. In the town of Ballyboreen, near Cappamore, Fitzmaurice's party was attacked by the Burkes, and Fitzmaurice was killed. Thus, in an obscure skirmish fell the man who for long had drawn the attention of all Europe on himself. His body was taken to Kilmallock and quartered above the town gates. The war ended in 1582, with Munster reduced to a desert, with Gerald XIV, Earl of Desmond, slain, and with the Munster Geraldines utterly overthrown. In 1594, O'Neill and O'Donnell raised the standard of revolt in Ulster. O'Neill soon realised that what was needed to rally Munster was a Geraldine. He chose James Fitzgerald, a nephew of the late Earl, and at Ballingarry, County Limerick, O'Neill formally dubbed him Earl of Desmond. His enemies in derision called him the Sugonel, but the Sugonel was to prove his worth, for he soon won back many of the Geraldine towns and castles. Seeing the following the Sugonel was commanding in Munster, the English decided to set up a rival. There was, in the Tower of London, James, the son of the late Earl Gerald, whom Gerald was compelled to give as a hostage for his good behaviour some 20 years before. This poor forgotten youth was now released and proclaimed Earl of Desmond by the English. He was sent back to Ireland and received a tumultuous welcome in Kilmallock when he arrived there on Saturday evening, the 20th of October 1600. Crowds lined the streets and windows, and even the rooftops, hoping to catch a glimpse of the representative of a line of mighty chieftains. With the next day, Sunday, James went to a Protestant service, and on his return from that service he was abused, derided and spat on. Since he was of no further use to the English, they had him taken back to the Tower, where he died soon after. Eventually the Sugonel was betrayed by his kinsman, Edmund Fitzgibbon, the last White Knight. He too was lodged in the Tower of London, where he died in 1608. His betrayer, the White Knight, died the same year and was buried in the Dominican monastery in Kilmallock, where his grave can still be seen. The monastery had been suppressed in the reign of Henry VIII, and the friars expelled in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. But later, when the persecution abated a little, they returned for a while. They were there in 1645 when Cardinal Rinuccini, the papal legate, spent a night there. The cardinal was then on his way to the Confederation of Kilkenny. War had been raging for 4 years in Ireland at this time, and soon Cromwell was to come, to leave a memory of cruelty and bloodshed that 3 centuries have not washed away. In 1648, Lord Inchiquin, one of Cromwell's ablest supporters, attacked the Kilmallock monastery and slew 2 members of the community. The rest fled in safety into the town. When the Irish resistance had been broken and the leaders put out of the way, Cromwell gave all the Irish Catholic landowners and property owners the choice of to hell or to Connaught. After their banishment, their lands and properties were to be handed over to the Cromwellian soldiers and to the wealthy Englishmen who had financed Cromwell's campaign. In order to carry out the confiscation and plantation as thoroughly and as methodically as possible, a survey of all Irish lands and properties was made. This was the famous Civil Survey of 1654. The following are some particulars gleaned from that part of the survey dealing with Kilmallock. Martin Wall of Kilmallock Irish Papist owned a thatched tenement where there is a bakehouse and garden. David Mead of Kilmallock Irish Papist owned a stone house. Randall Hurley of Kilmallock Irish Papist owned a stone house. Lawrence Mead of Kilmallock Irish Papist owned an old castle. Other Catholics who owned property in Kilmallock immediately prior to the Cromwellian plantation included Peter Fox of Kilmallock, Henry Wall, David Lewis, Nicholas Wall, John O'Gould of Knocksauna, Garrett Mead, Nicholas O'Fant, etc. Norman names like Mead, Wall, Fox, Blewett, Lewis had been closely associated with Kilmallock for hundreds of years and are still numerous in the district. While many of the old townland names which were listed in the 1654 survey have disappeared, it is interesting to list some of them. The Weaver's Road, Pierce's Mill, John's Mill, Abbey Farm, the Field of Garrett's Road, Small Mill, Glenfield, where Strake's Mill was later built, the Common Ditch. When the confiscated lands and properties in the Kilmallock area were eventually granted to the Cromwellian planters, the lion's share of the spoils went to the Coots and the Olivers. The memory of these planters still survives in the place names Moncoot and Castle Oliver. In 1690, Kilmallock was occupied by Irish troops, who were reviewed on Kilmallock Hill by the Duke of Berwick, a brilliant young commander who was later to make his mark with the Irish Brigade on the continent. The Jacobite-Williamite War ended in 1691 with the signing of the Treaty of Limerick. Soon, the long night of penal oppression would fall on the country, when the Catholic Irish, who comprised the vast majority of the population, would be shamefully discriminated against. One of the first edicts of the penal code was that all Catholic parish priests, the only kind of Catholic clergy allowed to remain in the country, had to be registered. And so, in 1704 we find that Father Moriarty registering for Kilmallock parish. In the early years of the 18th century, an attempt was made to establish a linen industry in Kilmallock, and for that purpose a number of families who were skilled in the making of the cloth were brought to Kilmallock from the neighbourhood of Portadown, County Armagh. Among the families who came were those of the Hawthorns, Gilbertsons and Baileys, and their descendants are still to be found in the Kilmallock area. The enterprise was not a success, however. The penal laws had made it illegal for the masses of the Irish people to own land, to practice their religion publicly, to educate their children, or to hold any position of trust. Then, to quote Canon Begley, after 60 years' dumb submission, they showed the first signs of revolt, when the White Boy movement was founded in Kilmallock by William Fant, an attorney. That was in 1760. Fant belonged to an old family of the district who had given their name to the townland of Fantstown. The White Boys gave first evidence of their existence by levelling the fences the landlords had recently erected to enclose the common land. Their movement would have a sporadic existence for the next 60 years or so. The White Boys were desperate men who frequently used desperate remedies in an endeavour to right the desperate conditions under which so many of the people lived. Ever since the fall of the Munster Geraldines, Kilmallock's fortunes were on the wane. By the second half of the 18th century, its days of glory were certainly over, and it was fast decaying. But relics of its former greatness were everywhere: a monastery, church, castles, a town gate, town walls, and numerous mansions of cut stone, the stone houses of the civil survey. And it still returned 2 members of Parliament. Because of the many historic rooms, it was called the Balvic of Ireland, after the famous Middle East city. Dr. Campbell, writing of a visit in 1775, stated that it must have been a place of high antiquity. It possesses a greater share of magnificence in its ruins than anything he has yet seen in Ireland. A year after Dr. Campbell's visit, the famous Dublin playwright John O'Keeffe had this to say of Kilmallock. The town is composed entirely of old castles joined to each other. The old inhabitants and a few country people living in the tops and bottoms of these castle houses, like birds and rabbits. In 1826, another traveller described Kilmallock as a place exhibiting the silence of a sacked and desolate city, and a writer in the Dublin Penny Journal of the 25th of August 1832 told of the spectacle Kilmallock had presented a few years previously, that of a noble town walled, turreted, and filled with stately monasteries, castles, and houses of cut stone, all ruined, silent, and deserted. Crofton Croker, who visited Kilmallock about the year 1820, has left us his impressions of his visit in the form of verse. When first I saw Kilmallock's walls, 'twas in the stillness of moonlight, and lofty towers and stately halls frowned darkly, then enwrapped in night, just touched with tinsel, streaks and gleams, mysterious as a town of dreams. But morning, with its rosy sky, dispelled this visionary pride. All greatness did in ruin lie. Mean hovels stood on every side. The peasant held the lordly pile, and cattle filled the roofless isle. Two famous Gaelic poets of the 18th century are said to have been born near Fanstown, about 3 miles east of Kilmallock. They were Sean O'Toole and Andreas Muckrid. These were the outstanding figures of the poets of the Maag countryside. At the end of his life, Andreas Muckrid, who was known as Amongre Sugok, the merry pedlar, came to live with his daughter at Fanstown. He was the sweetest singer of all the poets of the Maag, and is best known as the author of the celebrated song of Farewell to the Maagside, Slán le Maag. He came to Kilmallock one day in 1795, but collapsed at the bridge over the Luba, at the end of Wolftown Street. He was taken into the house of his friend the Hawthorns, the descendants of the Hawthorns who had come to establish a linen industry in the town, and it was there he died, seated in the chair by the fire. He was buried in the Hawthorne grave in Kilmallock, and a monument was erected over his grave in 1970. It has carved on it this verse from one of his poems. The lines in Irish we might translate as: See the apostle who at first sent thrice, denying his friend, how in his humility he was accepted back. O dear God, I implore, although I've broken the laws of the orders, admit like Peter the mongerer to your mansion. The Corporation of Kilmallock was dissolved under the Municipal Corporations Ireland Act 1840. By then the corporation had virtually become the private property of the Oliver family, and existed solely for their benefit and the benefit of their friends. On Ash Wednesday, 6th of March 1867, the Fenians attacked the Kilmallock police barracks. The attack was the most determined and sustained that took place during the Fenian Rising, a fact noted by the author of the well-known ballad about the old Fenian gun. I was down then in Kilmallock, 'twas the hottest fight of all. And you see he bared his arm, there's the mark still of a ball. I hope the young lads growing now will hold the ground we won, and not disgrace the cause in which I held that Fenian gun. Three men were killed during the Kilmallock fight. They were Daniel Blake, a brewery Fenian, Dr. Michael Cleary, who was present to render medical assistance to the Fenians, and the famous unknown Fenian, whom may have been Patrick Hassett of Bulgarin. The leaders of the attack were sentenced to varying terms of imprisonment. Patrick Walsh to 15 years, Daniel Bradley to 10 years, Dennis Hennessy, Patrick Reardon, John Sheehan, each to 7 years, Thomas Daly, Michael Noonan, William O'Sullivan, Maurice Fitzgibbon, each to 5 years. The greatest stronghold of Fenianism in Kilmallock was the large business establishment of William Henry O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan, who had about 40 men employed, gave every assistance to the movement, and his 17-year-old son was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for his part in the rising. William Henry O'Sullivan afterwards became a member of Parliament. He remained an ardent nationalist to the end of his life. Kilmallock was again a storm centre during the Land War. Father Eugene Sheehy was chairman of the local branch of the Land League. Father Sheehy's fame as an implacable enemy of landlordism earned him the title the Land League Priest. In May 1881, Father Sheehy and the other members of the Kilmallock Land League Committee were arrested and spent over 4 months in Kilmainham jail. In 1879, Father Sheehy had attended the inaugural meeting of the Land League in Dublin, and in 1884 he was present at the meeting in Hayes' Hotel in Thurles when the Gaelic Athletic Association was founded. He was still curate in Kilmallock at the time of the inaugural meeting of the GAA, so Kilmallock had a representative at the meeting which launched the Gaelic Athletic Association. Father Sheehy was later transferred as parish priest from Kilmallock to the neighbouring parish of Brewery, where one of his mass servers was the boy Eamon de Valera. The first branch of the Gaelic League was founded in Kilmallock in 1902. In 1914 there was a parade of Irish volunteers through the town, which was followed by an area addressed by Lord Ashbourne. The following year there was another great area and parade of volunteers in Kilmallock, at which addresses were delivered by Count Plunkett and Thomas Ashe. The War of Independence saw much action in Kilmallock. The local police barracks, considered one of the strongest in Ireland, was attacked and destroyed by the IRA on the night of the 19th of May 1920. Liam Scully, a volunteer from West Limerick, was killed in the attack, and 2 policemen were burned to death when the barracks went on fire. Other casualties in the War of Independence were local school teacher Michael Scanlon, shot dead by British forces as he made a dash from custody in Limerick City, and John Lynch, county councillor and local organiser for Sinn Féin, who was shot dead by British forces in a Dublin hotel. The Civil War period too saw much action in Kilmallock and surrounding districts, including the burning of Kilmallock Workhouse in July 1922. 3 years later, Kilmallock ceased to be a centre of local administration when the Kilmallock Rural District Council, in common with all such councils in Ireland, was abolished. Despite its many ancient and historic buildings, perhaps the most dominating feature of the Baltic landscape is that of the present Catholic Church of St. Peter and Paul's. This church is situated at the end of Shear Street. Joseph K. Bracken was a monumental sculptor and building contractor. He participated in the building of St. Peter and Paul's Catholic Church in 1877, and also placed the spire on the church, which was a fantastic piece of engineering even compared to present-day standards. There are at least 43 names inscribed on the inside of the local church. All these people contributed in a material way to the beauty of the church as we know it today. The church has many stained glass windows. The window behind the main altar is inscribed thus: "Pray for the repose of the soul of Reverend Thomas Downes, parish priest of Kilmallock from 1841 to 1890, by whose request this stained glass window has been provided." Over Our Lady's altar we see, "Pray for the Reverend Daniel O'Shea, died 7th of October 1911. Pray for the Reverend James O'Shea, parish priest of Kilmallock, April 1904. On the very beautiful sanctuary window to the right of Our Lady's altar is the following: "In memory of Patrick Hurley Glenfield and his wife Margaret, their sons William, James, Patrick, and their granddaughter Nellie Noonan." The altar of the Sacred Heart has a window inscribed, "Pray for Reverend P. Meehan of Kilmallock, who died 20th of April 1904. Here, at these beautiful grounds on the Creamery Road, we find the Church of Ireland, the Church of St. Peter and Paul, Kilmallock. This church was built in 1938. Although not as magnificent a structure as the Catholic Church in Shear Street, it does, however, cater equally for the spiritual needs of its faithful. Many old and esteemed families of the parish are laid to rest here within the grounds of the church. Names like Harris, Brooke, Bailey, McKeown and Watt are just a few which we can mention. In matters of education, Kilmallock has a commendable record. It had 7 schools in 1826, 6 of them being pay or head schools. The one free school was taught by Michael Gilbertson, a Protestant, whose income was £19 per year. A national school to house both boys and girls, a handsome and commodious structure, was opened in what is now Wolftown Street in 1864. Although no longer used, for many people this old building brings back memories, both good and not so good, of their school days. Whether it was getting 6 of the best for committing a misdemeanor, or just having to fill the inkwells or light the fire for your teacher, and perhaps, best of all, playing in the yard during the break. They are just part of the many memories which will be cherished of their school days. The Sisters of Charity of St. Paul came to Kilmallock in 1927. They took up residence in Sarsell Street and carried on a private, primary and secondary school for girls. A new primary school for girls was built in 1929, and Sister Dempna O'Sullivan of the Sisters of Charity of St. Paul became principal. The new school was named after Bishop O'Haley and Father Con O'Rourke, who were put to death in Kilmallock in 1579. A new convent was completed and occupied by the nuns in 1933, and their secondary school for girls was opened the following year. The secondary school has expanded greatly since its first small beginnings, when it had only 2 teachers. Since September 1971, it has been catering for boys as well as girls. After the old school closed in Wolftown Street, a new primary school for boys was built in 1966, and this is situated at the back of the present Catholic Church. Just across from the placid waters of the River Luga, we find a very fine vocational school, which was built in Kilmallock in 1964. After spending a strenuous day in the classroom, the pupils can be seen here enjoying a game of football in the school's sports field. In recent times, business and prosperity have been returning in a marked degree to Kilmallock. One could perhaps date the improvement from the establishment of the very successful Golden Vale Mart in the town in 1957. Indeed, another sign of the new spirit of confidence that began to manifest itself in Kilmallock was the major development of the town's GAA pitch, which immediately began to attract many important matches. Salamanca was established in 1970 and is now giving good employment. A further boost to the economy of the area was given by the opening of the new Provident Mill by Paul and Vincent in 1976. Also established in 1970 was Neodata, which is located on the railway road. Recently there has been major development on the Brewery Road industrial estate. And despite the difficult economic times which prevail, the idea is to commence construction of a new 25,000 feet advanced factory shortly, which is hoped will ultimately further boost the economy of the area. And there has been growth in the town itself, for, apart from private building, the County Council has erected 75 houses there since 1970. To meet the increasing demand for houses, the County Council has commenced construction of another housing project on the railway road. In the past few years, a new fire station has been built. And across from the fire station, the County Committee of Agriculture has built a new farm training centre. The library, which used to be housed in the People's Hall, has been moved to a more modern building in Shear Street.